Good morning, everyone. I am officially here. Ta-da. Let's do something a little bit different today. We'll do some news. Then I'm going to tell you a story, because we're going to need a story time after the news. And maybe give us some background of how the heck we got here at this particular point. And I'm not talking about thousands of years ago, because most of that is so distorted. We don't even have the right names of our countries and our towns anymore. We don't speak a language that is natural to any of us. It's so funny, on the weekend I watched this movie about the Ottoman Empire. I watched it and listened in Turkish. Of course, I had little subtitles. But I was listening to this Turkish and thought, oh my God, that's all of our languages, almost all of them. And I laughed when they used terms, because this was one of the movies that tried to be historically correct, not just flashy or showy. So most people won't watch this. There's not a whole lot of bombs going off or car chases. Okay, no car chases. I didn't even see what kind of a chariot. Anyway, do you know that the term wag the dog comes from Turkey? So we had a certain thing going on for a long time. For all of my fellow conspiracy nuts, we've just been proven right, and I would like to say goodbye to our Australian brothers and sisters. I'll explain that. Back in 2010, CBS News reported that the Australian government had a potential RFID chipping plan in the works related to healthcare system for your protection. But now it seems that this plan is being laid out, unfolding. And the push is not a result of any mandated healthcare reform, rather a clever propaganda campaign that equates RFID microchipping to becoming superhuman. Surprisingly enough, people are begging for it. This was the whole self-modification cult that we kind of introduced last year. So they're sneaking it in to the teenagers as a trend. And we'll talk about why our teenagers are like this soon. So under the headline, Australians embracing superhuman microchip technology, Australia's premier media outlet, news.com.au, so News Corp Australia, here's their report. It may sound like sci-fi, but hundreds of Australians are turning themselves into superhumans who can unlock doors, turn on lights, log into computers with the wave of their hand. Now Shanti Corporal, it's interesting the names that come up in these things, from Sydney, is at the center of the phenomenon after having 2 implants inserted under her skin. Now she can get into work and her car and her home without carrying a card or keys, and says her ultimate goal is to completely do away with a wallet and cards of any kind. What she told the news outlet is you can set up your life so you never have to worry about any passport or PIN numbers. It's the same technology as PayPass. so I'm hoping you'll be able to pay for things with it. Now with Opal, you get a unique identification card that could be programmed into the chip. So any door with a swipe card, it can open your computer, a photocopier. You get the idea. Loyalty cards for shops too. Just another thing for your wallet. So these microchips, but the size of a grain of rice, and they act like a business card and transfer contact details to smartphones and hold complex medical data as well. Now, in her interview with the Australian news outlet Shanti, now I don't know if she just walked right out of CERN or not, but the news I'm going to tell you today, and it's all true news, I'm not even playing with you like I really wanted to today, but the news is so scary and funny scary. So you're going to get your terror porn, a really good dose today, but we're going to laugh while we do it because I just can't believe the stuff coming out. So anyway, Shanti claims that her friends and family are envious of her new microchip. She's calling it the lifestyle. So we'll have to listen to that keyword going worldwide because the kids are going to dig this. Now she says her nana wants one. And I guess since we can't train our nanas to use the TV controller, that this would be easier, make your life easier. So she says that she's had more opposition to her tattoos than she's ever had to the chip, and her friends are jealous. In fact, the 27-year-old has noticed a business opportunity and set up a distribution service called Chip My Life with her husband, Skive Stevens. Skive. We'll go into, one day, remind me, and I'll go into what that word means. But apparently this is their real names. But anyway, Skive says that for just 80 to 140, people can become superhuman. So on the same day this news story broke, Shanti appeared in Australia's launch of the much anticipated cyborg-themed video game Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Now, Deus Ex Machina is something that we went into in depth. Now, alongside American implantable technology with the pioneer Amal Grafstra. As you can see, the push for this microchipping and the assimilation of the human population with robots and technology is something that most likely will be sold to the public as helping you to become a superhuman, the next god, a new god, evolved. They'll probably use the word evolved a lot because chicks dig that. Guys dig that too, but chicks get a little bit tingly over that word. So clearly, if you become a machine, well, at least part machine computer, that means there will be someone who can control you and your little technology. So if you think the elites wouldn't capitalize on such an exceptional opportunity to control the world population, you obviously don't know history very well, or have listened to me ever before. So for the newcomers, welcome. We're going to have a little mind-blowing show, I hope, today. I hope it's going to be fun. So, Amal Grafstra, I love that name, who became one of the first people with one of these implants. Now, this was back around 2005. One of these specific kinds of implants. Now we know that they have been chipping soldiers, anyone in the services, probably since the Second World War. Can't prove that 100%, but it looks like it from patents that you can do a search, and you can see that the patents are pretty darn old. So this just made headlines recently in the United States with a prototype of the world's first implant-activated smart gun. Because you know Americans love their guns. This is the scariest thing. Oh my God. Anyway, and he's a huge proponent of this new technology. He's written a book, spoken at TEDx, also appeared in a number of documentaries, because they are pushing this, and the kids are digging it, and some of the new agey people are buying into it, especially the new agers that work for the government, and we have a lot of those. Now, in an interview with the Australian media outlet, Amal explained that the technology he has implanted into his body has given him the ability to communicate one-on-one with machines. It's literally integrated into who I am. His words. Now, Shanti has brought into the culture that dominates into society today, which is one dominated by the fantasy of superheroes, which I will be going into soon. And that mesmerizes a population at theaters all across the globe. We're seeing the superhumans, the angels, the archetype. Basically, think of every single superhero ever as Thor, one of the mighty men of old. We keep regurgitating the same tale, basically. We do it in a little bit of a nationalistic flavor, so it sounds like he's our guy, but it's basically everybody's Thor, and every god is Odin or Pan. We'll go into that. So ever since watching movies, Terminator, Matrix, Minority Report, I've been questioning if we could actually live like that. I've always wondered why we aren't living as superhumans. Not my words, Shanti's words. Now you can watch how Shanti uses the microchip in her daily life. I will post the video on her page later, so if you get a chance, please take a look, because it's one of those too creepy to miss. Because this is how they're going to do it. Of course, we would think that they would just sneak up on us and just start chipping randomly. No, they don't want that. They want to do it. They want you to think it's fun. It's a good time. That's why. So it's now official too. The U.S. government ends their fiscal year with 1.4 trillion debt increase. Trillion. Now, I don't know if they owe the planet Saturn. I don't know who they're going to pay for this, but it's incredible. But I guess not so much if you think of the wars they're in right now. And of course, it's not just United States, but you have to understand that the coalition that's been in charge of Europe and most of this planet for a very long time is the same guys, and they work on barbarism in words and deeds. And the new barbarism, though, of the United States and their imperial wars is unprecedented. Over the past decade and a half, United States and its allies have invaded, occupied, killed, wounded, dispossessed over 10 million people from Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon. Military and civilian officials have systematically destroyed entire economies, fostered ethno-religious wars, placed corrupt puppet leaders, political of course, in power. It's insane what we're seeing right now. What Russia is sponsoring and doing in Syria is not counterterrorism. It too is barbarism. Now, the U.S. representatives, especially to United Nations, their ambassadors ranting, their ambassadors, I kind of call her ranting Sam, her name's Samantha Power, accused Russia and the Syrian governments of barbarism, specifically, claiming Moscow or Damascus had attacked unarmed United Nations humanitarian convoy delivering aid to civilians in Aleppo. So I started looking into that. But no evidence was actually presented. Rants and threats do not require any facts or any proof. They only require vehement emotional ejaculations and compliant mass propaganda organs. And we have a great big one. Barbarians. To be clear, invoke images of leaders and groups, which, bother all civilized norms, laws. They only respond to armed force. In the present context, Power's charges of barbarism against Russia and Syria, it was used to justify the U.S. aerial bombardment of a Syrian army outpost, which killed and maimed over 200 government troops engaged in combating ISIS terrorists and jihadi invaders. So in other words, accusing Syrian soldiers of barbarism was Ambassador Power's cynical way of dehumanizing the young victims of an earlier and deliberate U.S. war crime. So let's analyze the appropriate context for the use and abuse of the language barbarism and its rightful application. So, barbarism, the deed. Over the past decade and a half, the U.S. and its allies, as I've said, invaded, occupied, killed, wounded, dispossessed over 10 million people. Let that sink in. Countries from Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, all across Africa, military and civilian officials systematically destroyed economies, fostered ethno-religious wars. Oh yes, they did so. Undermined ancient communities, like they're doing in their own country right now, and family ties, and placed corrupt political puppets in power. Now, promoted by the U.S., torture, arbitrary arrest, incarceration have been the norm, creating lawless and chaotic societies, which had once been productive stable. The shredding of social structures has provokes massive population flight, like we're seeing worldwide. It was what I told you was coming in 2010, the Northing. Millions of desperate refugees fleeing invasions and war and total society breakdown. The result of deliberate imperialistic policy decisions has emptied entire cities now, neighborhoods, broken families, destroyed lives, and the futures for many millions of young Arabs, Muslims, because they're the bad guys right now. At least the ones they want you to hate, and it's working really well because of the crap that we're seeing happening. People are like eating this stuff up. We just have to give you someone to hate, right? And you just start licking off that plate. Not you guys, but you know what I'm talking about. So as human toll mounts and Western Europe is flooded with the results of the U.S. aggressive wars, the imperialists have sharpened their shrill rhetoric, labeling all of their adversaries and critics as accomplices in war crimes, barbarians. Because name-calling is awesome. So the greater and the more sustained the policy of wanton imperialistic pillage, plunder, rape, the more intense the frustration of its leaders over the ultimate failures, the greater the recourse of the diplomat. The principal adversaries to U.S. aggression, Russia, China, and Iran, many places have not invaded any sovereign countries, nor have they provoked the desperate flights of millions of refugees. Russia was invited to aid the Syrian government. Don't forget that. And their allies confronting the invasion of terrorist mercenaries who are intent on dividing up the country. Crimea peacefully rejoined Russia via elections. You know that thing where you vote and it's actually counted? That's what they did. Moscow rejected playing any military role in support of the Western wars against Iraq and Yemen and Libya. None of this rose to the level of US-EU barbarism. In Asia, the West has invaded and devastated Vietnam, the Philippines, Afghanistan. Japan, now a U.S. ally, had invaded China, Korea, Southeast Asia. China, for its part, was not engaged in any imperialistic war of conquest for centuries. We'll give them that they've learned their lesson. Now they're just kind of kicking their own butts. Now Iran has not invaded any country in modern times. On the contrary, Iraq invaded Tehran in the 80s with U.S. support and waged a decade-long war which caused millions of casualties. So in truth, if waging wars, staging invasions, destroying whole societies, causing millions of deaths are the measure of barbarism, then the U.S. and Europe and Japan have been 1, 2, and 3. No particular order. I'm just putting them in the group. Now to claim otherwise and follow the ranting script of the ambassadors is to enter into a tunnel of hallucinations where language of literal values embellishes some truly barbarian acts. The entire language of politics has been perverted, and converted into an artifice of self-delusion. Terrorist militias are repackaged as rebels and moderates, spreading barbarism from the imperial Western center to the periphery. The deliberate spread of terrorism is itself a barbaric deed which degrades the status of this planet, but especially the Western powers. Now, in ancient Greece, the barbarians were those outside of the empire who refused to speak the language of those in that civilization or worship the same thing. Then they were called savage invaders, seeking to pillage the wealth and culture of the empire. Today, the barbarians emerge from inside the empire and spread outward. The imperial leaders have engaged in serial wars of destruction and pillage, even as their own societies and economies wallow in ignorance, misery, debt, addiction, criminality. Imperial barbarians devastate whole cultures, erasing great history, great legacies of ancient civilizations like Iraq, targeted, Syria, targeted, Aleppo. We did a whole series on what was in Aleppo before the invasion. They had the Pentateuch there. They had the most perfect books. That is now gone. We had a chance to find out what was really written in those 5 books. Not anymore. Now we get the white bread stepped on version of King James, who made sure that everyone was dead who left that council, by the way. So while imposing the culture of morons and drugs and electronic gadgets and nifty little chipping programs, which has already infanticized our own populations, made most people children, great big whiny sucky babies. The empire of barbarians is infested with money changers, corrupt speculators. They have debased entire legal system, legislative bodies. The public space has become a private latrine for the elite, closed to any real public discourse, any true debate. Electoral spectacles, rather than reasoned debates, undermine any kind of civilization or principle of a civilized people. Imperial conquerors, enmeshed in military metaphysic, can't reconstruct a devastated society into productivity or a productive colony, even though they're not calling it that, but that's what's happening. Nor can they learn or benefit from the best and the brightest amongst captors, as Rome did with Greece, because it's sown its own destruction, salted the very soil under the feet of its conquered people. The barbarian imperial world order is constantly at war with the others and can never assimilate and learn from previous and precious human treasures that it is so wantonly destroyed. It rules by terror and deceit, abroad and at home, as so cruelly displayed by the imperial rants of this ambassador, Samantha Power. Its oratory at international forums reflect the hysteria of the mediocre, mindless barbarians raving amongst themselves in marbled echo chambers. In the end, the imperial barbarians will be besieged by their own fleeing vassals and puppets. When they finally confront their own decay and internal dissolution, they have to decide whether to engage in the last global conflagration or dismantle the imperial barbaric order and choose justice and law and civilization. But it won't be us, because I don't see us doing anything about it. Not enough. Not nearly enough. The world is at a crossroads with this global military agenda right now. Our world's community is being held hostage by this agenda and the implications of its new tactical nuclear weapons. One of the many flashpoints around the Middle East and China and North Korea and Russia's borders could spark the war that threatens the future of humanity. There is no such thing as a humanitarian war against the world. United States of America is not fighting terrorists in Syria. The Obama administration, with support of its allies, including Turkey and Saudi Arabia, is supporting ISIS, Daesh, the Islamic State. Obama's counterterrorism campaign in Syria and Iraq, completely bogus. Obama is protecting the terrorists. That's it. They're being protected. And it's not just, I don't blame him so much. I don't think Obama is protecting the terrorists. I think he's a figurehead and he's doing what he's told. That's it. You know, when we have ex-CIA detainees describing how terrifying the unreported torture techniques being used right now on fellow human beings. You know, in a new Human Rights Watch report that was released probably Monday, our time, 2 former CIA detainees described previously unreported torture techniques used by secret U.S. prisons overseas, shedding new light on the program the government fought for years to keep hidden. 2 men from Tanzania recently repatriated after being in CIA custody for 13 years without any charge, independently described being tortured with makeshift electric chairs, deprived of sleep, subject to multiple forms of water torture, chained by the wrists to ceilings of cells for extended period of time, severely beaten, stripped naked. It looks like some sort of sexual thing. But, you know, the twist in our porn lately, it's horrific what people are watching. What is being presented as normal sexual behavior, which I think is healthy, if it was normal sexual behavior. But when I looked at what happened in Abu Ghraib, I realized those people who were young, they were young torturers, have been watching some things, some changes that have been happening worldwide. Now, I'm not going to read it because it grosses me out too much. But there are horrifying accounts of previously unreported CIA torture methods, showing that we don't know how much the U.S. tortures and how broad this torture program is. Most of the abuse happened at a facility known as the Cobalt. It's in Afghanistan. It's also called the Dark Prison. Other detainees have referred to it as the Dark Prison as well, or the Salt Pit. Interrogators at this facility threaten the well-being of family members. They use sound disorientation techniques being used on the natives right now, protesting so we can have some last water on this continent. Maybe too late, anyway, but it's being used on this continent too. Against natives, again. People being denied sleep, using round-the-clock interrogations, depriving people of any sense of time, keeping people isolated in total darkness, lowering quantity or quality of food, using cold temperatures, playing music 24 hours a day, keeping people shackled, hooded, sometimes held upside down. The CIA cable issued September 21st, 2002 described this man as clearly broken, on the verge of a complete breakdown. But after being in their tender administrations for 13 years, I don't know how he survived. Now, both men were set free in 2015 with no compensation, no support from the U.S. or Tanzanian government or the UN, who you'd think would be paying attention to this. This violates international human rights laws, particularly the International Covenant, that's what it's called, Covenant, on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention Against Torture, both of which the U.S. has ratified. Under those laws, governments have obligations to ensure the right to an effective remedy for victims of serious human rights violation, including torture, other ill treatment. Although these violations do not take place in the United States, they occur while individuals are under, effectively, protection or the control of the United States forces. The violence that we're seeing, kind of like the Pentagon announcing their third phase of military buildup against China, the U.S. economic hegemony under the TPP, supported by the military might. It's like the Crusades. Submit or die. Convert or die. You know, I hear from people telling me there's this great enlightened shift going on. I wonder if they've turned on the news. Now, I understand turning on the news is probably a bad idea. Looking at the paper is probably a bad idea. Going out on the streets if you're the wrong shade of skin is a really bad idea. But last Thursday, a further dramatic expansion of the Pentagon's rebalancing, or pivot, that's what they're calling it, to the ASEAN Pacific will only heighten the already tense military confrontation with China. Asian Pacific, they're saying, is the single most consequential region for America's future. Now, speaking aboard a aircraft carrier, I guess in San Diego, the third phase, which we've talked about before, of a U.S. military buildup and the strengthening of a principled and inclusive security network. I just got the goosebumps. In Asia, while claiming that Beijing was not excluded from this network, every aspect of the third phase is aimed at preparing for war with China. I want to repeat something I told you guys. Millions of trained soldiers. Now, I thought the United States had a bunch of guys and women now, because apparently you guys don't have enough people to rape while you go on your crusades. China has prepared a force. You do not want to tango with these people, and they're hungry. They don't have for the most part, our luxury lifestyles. They will hand your butts to you. This will be one that, if it happens with China or Russia, the only thing that could save us is if they use cool heads and take the people in control of your military out. Canada too, because Canada will most likely do what you say. Canada is like the United States little brother that they have to take with them, kind of thing. I wish we weren't, but we're controlled by the same people, so unfortunately. The importance that Carter attached to this TPP. Here's his words: to bind the United States more closely together with 11 other countries underlines the real purpose of this pivot. This third phase. To maintain American dominance and subordinate China to the interests of the United States. This is his word. The very terms of the TPP ensure that Beijing will be excluded unless it accepts the rules set by Washington. And that means that all of the 11 other countries have to submit to American law. So the Defense Secretary made clear U.S. economy hegemony had to be underpinned by military might. In the outlining third phase, he declared the United States will continue to sharpen our military edge so we can remain the most powerful military on the planet and the security partner of choice. That's what your government and the people in control have made you become. Carter indicated that the first phase of the pivot, announced in 2011, involved a boost of the U.S. military, restructuring of its basing arrangements, tens of thousands of military American personnel redirected to Asia, with a commitment to station 60% of overseas naval and air assets in the region, restructuring of U.S. bases in Japan, South Korea, Guam, Hawaii has begun. New basing arrangements reached with Australia. The second phase involves sending the most advanced capacities to the Asian Pacific, including the F-22s, F-35, the stealth fighter jets, the P-8 Marine patrol aircraft, the Navy's newest surface warfare vessels, as well as continuous deployment of strategic bombers. It's also included a concerted effort to expand military ties throughout the region in an effort to encircle China with allies and strategic partners. Carter highlighted strengthening security relations with Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, India, Singapore, Vietnam, New Zealand in particular, in order to maintain the military edge. His words. Carter outlined his extensive plans of qualitatively upgrading and investing in our regional force posture. He provided a list of high-tech projects already funded and some to be starting this year. Making a Virginia-class nuclear submarine more lethal, more capable. Trebling. You know, 3 times their cruise missile payload. Increasing funding for multiple types of undersea drones as a part of $40 billion in allocations over the next 5 years to maintain the most lethal undersea and anti-submarine force in the world, providing $12 billion over 5 years for the new B-12 Raider long-range strike bomber, spending $56 billion over the next 5 years to buy more than 400 stealthy F-35 Joint Strike Fighters, investing $16 billion over 5 years to upgrade the aerial tanker fleet, repurposing the SM-6 missile so that it can also strike enemy ships at sea at very long ranges, improving the range and accuracy for land attack, anti-ship missiles, as well as new torpedoes, making large new investments to the tune of $34 billion next year alone in cyber, electronic, and space warfare. Do these people sound like they're backing down to you? Are they backing off? Have they become enlightened? Are they going to switch to their 5th density? Every one of these new weapons and upgrades is geared to fight a war with China and Russia, but premised on the Pentagon's air-sea battle strategy, a massive missile, an airstrike on the China mainland, supplemented by crippling a naval blockade. Moreover, Carter said, there are more surprises, some leap-ahead investments that will keep our decades-old commitment to undergirding security in the Asia-Pacific strong, unchallengeable. The 3rd phase features intensification of Asia-Pacific's growing principled and inclusive security network, which Carter declares was not a formal alliance, nor is it in any effort to contain or isolate anyone. The use of the term principled, denoting shared interests and values, is designed to include China by the sound, but exclude China by principle. By cynically and hypocritically, I guess, contrasting a network of supposed democracies with an autocratic regime in Beijing. The speech was delivered just before attending a meeting of the defense ministers of the Association of the Southeast East Asian nations in order to draw these countries into a U.S.-led security network. It's worth noting that these 10 ASEAN, it's interesting they're called the ASEANs, oh God, members, are the Thai military junta, who, is having a good time slaughtering their own people, the Stalinist police state regimes in Vietnam, doing the same thing, and Cambodia and Laos, virtually one-party states in Malaysia and Singapore, absolute monarchy of the Brunei, the Philippines, currently headed by the fascist president Rodrigo Duterte, along with Indonesia and Myanmar. We'll continue after the break. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Trace Elements Radio, live on Trace Elements Radio and Revolution Radio Studio A. Big hugs and kisses, you guys. I should have announced that I was coming on. And to answer your question, how am I doing? Well, I'm going to start testing wheelchairs soon. So that's how I'm doing. Talks just stopped over what's going on in Syria. I don't know how anyone in their right mind thinks they're going to be fighting Russia and China alone. Like, do we really want a nuclear war with Russia or China? Because through endless, non-stop barrage of ugly propaganda, the U.S., Canadian, and many European governments, with the mainstream press, have put the world on a course for that. A potential nuclear showdown with Russia. The risk has been undertaken cavalierly, with bizarre expressions of self-righteousness from Western institutions. This extraordinarily dangerous moment reflects the insistence of the establishment in general, but in Washington in particular, that could continue to rule the world, and that it will not broach the possibility of any other nation asserting their own interests, even in their own neighborhood. Rather than adjust to a new multi-popular world, which this is, like it or not, one big family, dysfunctional or not, the powers that still are, not were, still obviously are, in Washington, had deployed a vast array of propaganda assets that are financed or otherwise encouraged to escalate an information war so that Russia and China is reading this onslaught of insults as the conditioning of the Western populations for a world war, because that is how it's done. This is how they rile you up. Next, they're going to be telling you that they're raping babies and eating them, because that's what worked last time. This machinery consists not just of outlets and activities funded by your tax dollars via national endowments for democracies, for U.S. Agency for International Development, for NATO's Strategic Communications Command, but like-minded human rights entities paid for by billionaires in billionaire currency and speculators like George Soros, or controlled by neoconservative ideologues who now run the majority of U.S. newspapers like Washington Post, New York Times. This propaganda apparatus now has so many specified features that you get supposedly progressive and anti-war organizations actually promoting major U.S. invasion of Syria right now under guise of sweet-sounding policies like no-fly zones, safe zones, the same euphemisms that were used as a gateway to the bloody regime wars in Iraq and in Libya. There exists what intelligence veterans call a mighty Wurlitzer, an organ with so many keys and pedals that it's hard to know where all the sounds are coming from. How it could make such a powerful harmony. All building to the same crescendo. But the crescendo may now be war. Nuclear armed war. As a prelude, I guess, to something destabilizing. Something aimed at regime change. In Moscow, in China, or an outright war. I don't know, guys. Cold War today, tomorrow, every day until the end of the war. Till the end of the world. Russia, suspected of election schemes. U.S. probes plan to sow voter distrust. That's the Washington Post. One-page lead. Headline, September 6th. Think about it. The election that Americans are suffering through, cringing in embarrassment, making them think of moving ahead, renouncing their citizenship, an election causing the Founding Fathers to throw up, then turn over in their graves and throw up again. This is because the Russian devils are sowing voter distrust? Who knew? But of course, that's the way commies are, right? Oh wait, I forgot, they're no longer commies. So what are they? Oh yes, they still have that awful old hang-up of so worthy of condemnation by decent people everywhere. They want to stand against, or at least in the way, of American world domination. What nerve. The first Cold War performed a lobotomy on Americans, replacing brain matter with anti-communist viral matter, producing more than 70 years of functional national stupidity. For all of you who missed this fun, there's the good news. Cold War Parte 2 is here. As big and as stupid as ever. Russia and Vladimir Putin repeatedly, automatically blame for all manner of things. The story which follows in the Washington Post headline does not even bother to make up something that could pass as evidence. The newspaper just makes the claim, at the same time pointing out that the intelligence community is not saying it has definitive proof, such as tampering, or any Russian plans to do so. But the one-page headline already has served its purpose, because most people who even send me stuff to read only read the first title and don't read the actual article. Hillary Clinton, in her debate with Trump, likewise used Russia of all kinds of computer hacking. Even Trump, not usually a stickler for any sort of accuracy, challenged her to offer something along the lines of evidence. She had nothing to offer. In any event, all this is a diversion. It's not hacking per se that bothers the establishment. It's the revelations of their lies that drive them up the wall. The hack of the Democratic National Committee on the eve of the party's convention disclosed a number of embarrassing internal emails forcing resignations. September 12th, you could read in the Post that a well-known physician had called for Clinton to be checked on possible poisons after her collapse in New York. Said the good doctor, "I do not trust Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump." With those two things, all things are possible. And numerous other examples that make no freaking sense could be given here of the Post's near juvenile anti-Russian bias. One of the most common subjects has been Crimea. Moscow's invasion of Crimean Peninsula in the Ukraine, February 14th, repeatedly cited as proof of Moscow's belligerence, expansionist foreign policy, need for Washington to once again feed the defense budget many-headed monster. But we're never reminded that Russia was acting or reacting to a U.S.-supported coup, which overthrew a democratically elected government, the one of the Ukraine, on Russia's borders, and replace it with a regime of neo-Nazis, complete with swastikas, I kid you not. Russia invaded to assist Eastern Ukrainians in their resistance to this government. They did not cross the border inasmuch as Russia already had a military base there. NATO, now equals USA, has been surrounding Russia for decades. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov captured an exquisite shamelessness of this with his remarks September 27, 2014, "Excuse us for our existence in the middle of your bases." By contrast, in the U.S., the U.S. State Secretary of State, John Kerry, NATO is not a threat to anyone. It is a defensive alliance. It is simply meant to provide security. It is not focused on Russia. It is not focused on anyone else. There's no green eggs and ham. NATO war games in these areas are frequent, to the point of being almost constant. The encirclement of Russia is about complete, except for Georgia and the Ukraine. In June, Germany's foreign minister, Frank-Walter, shockingly accused NATO of warmongering. How would the U.S. react to a Russian coup in Mexico or Canada, followed by a Russian military exercise in the same area? Since the end of the Cold War Part 1, NATO has been searching for a reason to justify its existence. Their problem can be summed up with this question: if NATO had never existed, what argument could be given now to create it? The arrogance of U.S. policy in Ukraine, best epitomized by the now famous remark of Victoria Nuland, Assistant Secretary of State Department, reacting to the possible European Union's objection to Washington's role in the Ukraine. And I quote, she said, "Fuck the EU," except she put an F there. Unlike the United States, Russia does not seek world domination, nor even to dominate the Ukraine, which Russia could have done a long time ago if they wanted. Neither did the Soviet Union set out to dominate Eastern Europe post-World War II. Must be remembered that Eastern Europe became communist because of Hitler, with the approval of the West, used as a highway to reach Soviet Union to wipe out the Bolsheviks, basically. That the Russians in World War I and II lost about 40 million people because the West twice used this highway to invade Russia. 40 million people. It should not be surprising that after World War II, the Soviets were determined to close that highway. So, we're not just marching. This planet is running to the end of the world. Scientists have recently reported the mass extinctions of marine animals. That it may soon be occurring at such alarmingly rapid rates, way higher than any previously projected. It certainly can't just be due to pollution, rising water temperatures, loss of habitat. That many land species are facing similar fate now for the same reasons. Those ones: human stupidity. Perhaps, though, the biggest foreboding danger of all facing humans is the loss of the global honeybee population. The conquest, or the consequence of the dying bee population, impacts man on the highest level of our food chain, posing an enormously grave threat to our survival. Even if we stopped killing each other, it may be too late. Since no other single animal species plays a more significant role in producing fruits and vegetables that we, humans, commonly take for granted, yet require on a daily basis to stay alive. The greatest modern scientist, Albert Einstein, once said, "Mankind will not survive the honeybee's disappearance for more than 5 years." Since 2006, beekeepers have been noticing their populations dying off, increasingly rapid rates. Subsequent researchers have been scrambling to come up with accurate explanation, but it's a combo event again. Cell phones. You have a cell phone near beehive, the bees die. Poison on our foods we're eating at. There is no magic land. There is no magic fairy dusted fruit or vegetables that no longer contain poison. But an effective strategy to save the bees, and in turn save us, Homo sapiens, from extinction, has not been found. Recently, harsh winters. That's why, a lot of the reports about the bee deaths that come from Canada that say, "Oh my God, she lost 4 hives." We lose over half of all bee populations because of the winter. It's easier in the States. It's easier in a lot of places. But this year, we are going to have a freeze rate that will last well into spring. These will be instrumental in decimating the honeybee population. Well, in Iowa, it's already down by 70%, as well as other historically high yielding honey states. The Dakotas, Montana, Minnesota, the Northern Plains, the Midwest states have regionally always produced the most honey, but severely hurt now by long winters in the last couple of years. Florida, as the third largest honey producer, especially California, always amongst the top producers, hit especially hard by decreasing colonies. 2006, when this was first noticed, California was right at the top with North Dakota, producing nearly twice as much honey as the next state, South Dakota. But the bee numbers have incurred such heavy losses that in 2011, California's honey production fell in half. The recent drought in California had become an additional factor, driving both its honey yield and bee numbers down. Less rain means less flowers, less things available to pollinate. Honeybee colony collapse disorder, they have a big name for it now. This loss of bee phenomenon has been called, well, it's currently recognized as such an urgent crisis that a month ago Newsweek ran an article outlining the U.S. Department of Agriculture's announcement that it will provide $3 million subsidy in order to help the one animal on the planet that will either make or break our food. Now, according to the latest USDA industry survey, this emergency plan comes after nearly a third of the commercial honeybees died last winter. I didn't realize that was that high. A whopping increase of 42% from the previous year. $3 billion. $1 million giveaway program is designed to entice Midwest dairy farmers, cattle ranchers to reseed their fields this spring with eco-friendly crops, alfalfa, clover, to develop healthier habitats for the increasing national bee rate. Last month in Newsweek, it reported that the honeybees in trucks migrate to various regions of the country to pollinate an estimated $40 billion worth of agriculture produce each year. This means every third bite of food that you eat comes from the result of bees and other pollinators. USDA stated that more than 130 fruits and vegetables that make up a nutritious diet are cross-pollinated by bees. Commercial bees raised on farms, then shipped to other farms in the country, used for pollination purposes, along with the wild bees, are responsible for the pollination of 80% of all the crops in the United States. In the last decade alone, 30% of the population bees are gone. They're just gone. Nearly 1/3 of all bee colonies in the United States are gone. The rate of bee depopulation is growing each year. 42% more last year than the year before, with a current annual rate estimated at a loss of $30 billion a year. with such an enormous loss in revenue. Last month's USDA announcement of $3 million investment in farmer aid in comparison to formidable challenge seems a paltry drop in a bucket, so they are just going to ignore the fact that they die, we die. We look at this, and I do have a couple articles up for you to read on that. Because bees have already been put on the endangered species list several places. And then I still get messages, Tracey, if you would just see how the world is changing. I see how the world is changing. I absolutely see it. Kind of wondering if I'm alone on this. We are not evolving. We are devolving. Some of the things that are going on, I've talked to you about the Stranger Things. Real life 80s style horror. All of us have kids now. Well, the majority of us 80s partiers. Stranger Things works a lot of well-tilted plots, familiar riffs from countless 80s horrors and predominantly sci-fi films, but it also taps into real-life horrors that are playing out in the media. Well, especially the ones that happened in the early 80s. Highly publicized abductions of children. The rise of conspiracies over child trafficking. Organized pedophilia. Government cover-ups. The role of 24-hour television news in feeding the fear over what seems like a new plague descending over the world. This is the unspoken backdrop that animates the tension over the young boy Will's disappearance. For any of you who might think that Winona Ryder's performance was a bit over the top, well, if you look carefully at the producers, they inject some not too subtle symbolism into the scenes surrounding Will's captivity in the Upside Down, where I think we're living right now. Symbolism that signals that to more salient horrors, it's not something extra dimensional coming. So if you wonder why so many people, or especially parents in their 50s, in that age group, give or take 10 years, are overprotective and paranoid, realize that many of us were kids themselves during the early 80s, when this media firestorm over a series of shocking kidnappings and murders of young children. These took place in an already heightened atmosphere of social anxiety, in large part fed by an endless deluge of slaughter and serial killer movies and series of satanically inspired crimes and serial murders. We have been fed a diet of horror. There's also the fact that Satanism popping up again and again in crimes, in abuse cases. There is an ongoing controversy over an existence of any kind of satanic ritual abuse, real or imagined, with any organized scale. There's also a widespread agreement that it's common among individual abusers to try to put a mythology to it. kind of like the individual abusers of this earth are putting a mythology to what they're doing. Certain investigators that were involved in the Crossroads case, do you remember that? Believe that there were ritual aspects. Other high-profile abduction cases in New York area too in the 80s. It's one of the most knowledgeable detectives of Frank Sayers when it comes to missing children, cold cases in New York City. He's very instrumental in bringing Eaton Pat's trial. Do you remember that? It is believed that Eaton was taken by an individual passed along a cult of sorts. He's so very sensitive to the idea that a cult could be behind the disappearance of a child. I don't think, however, we're calling it a devil-worshipping cult. But more and more cults that engage in pedophilia seem to be doing this. Just so happens that one of the cults mentioned in the film, the Church of the Process, the former leader, lives in Staten Island. So the proximity of a cult definitely put the police on high alert. Especially when kids start disappearing. And there's always a steady stream of satanic themed movies, books, records that followed in the wake of the creation of MKULTRA's, the CIA project, MKOFTEN. I've told you about that one, right? If we have time. If not, remind me, we'll go into it. No, not ultra, often. MKOFTEN. Anyway. The rise of emotional-based anti-intellectual movements, especially in religions, Christianity, such as Pentecostalism, but many, also fed and financed by elements in and around the intelligence community. I'm just trying to say we've been set up to react in a certain way to what is going on. And because of the trauma that's happened here on Earth, shut off certain things. The movies, like I've told you before, are to trigger you, because we are all members of the project now. Project often. Should I go into that? Okay, let me go into that, and then we can continue. This. When I was talking about Stranger Things at first, because it reintroduced the MK in the Ultra. Many people don't realize that they no longer need to take you in. I'm starting to wonder, really, if I was missing the point of this. That MKUltra is not what people should be discussing right now in relation to the experimentation depicted in that series. I do like the Stranger Things. But the sister program, more controversial, even more secretive, because I've hardly ever heard it spoken of, MKOFTEN. We could argue that MKUltra occasionally seem to cross over somewhere between science and wizardry, and people who have been messed with, obviously, but often allegedly swore off science altogether, veered from wizardry to sorcery to sheer bloody madness. And I am seeing the reaction of people like cops with the massive bloodshed. I want to talk about that today too, but I can't do everything. I just want to go into how we were set up for what's going on right now. People would not say, let's fight Russia and China together. Let's surround Russia with a clear head. There's no one that crazy without provocation. This is a well-laid plan. And for several years, researchers have often claimed that while presenting itself as another drug study program, MKOFTEN was in fact a campaign to weaponize the occult. It's why so many of us talk about it, because we want to hear it. That CIA agents, scientists, actually began consulting with psychics, with witches, looking into the feasibility of voodoo and black magic as tools of their trade. Often, actually, the actual documentation is scanty. But if you look at the culture and its large footprints, it's stamped deep into society's face. A British journalist, Gordon Thomas, who made his bones when he was given inside access to the Mossad, brought MKOFTEN to the mainstream in his book on the CIA, Mind Control, Secrets and Lies. That's one worth buying, by the way. Operation Often was also initiated by the chief of the CIA's Technical Services Branch, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Do you remember him? He comes up as our bad guy often. To explore the world of black magic, to harness the forces of darkness, to challenge the concept that inner reaches of the mind are beyond reach. As part of Operation Often, Mr. Gottlieb and other CIA employees visited with and recruited fortune tellers, palm readers, clairvoyants, astrologers, mediums, psychics, specialists in demonology, witches, wizards, Satanists, other occult practitioners, shaman, voodoo priestesses, and much more, for real. From the Parapolitical History blog. I'll get you guys some links to all this stuff later so you can check it out in depth. Thomas's claims were controversial amongst his peers, other journalists, inside sources. John Marks, Martin A. Lee, H.P. Albarelli, I think his name is, have turned up nothing to confirm Thomas's account of Often, and some of Thomas's other information, including the CIA's behavior modification experiments. Those concerning Frank Olson are rather debatable as well. This isn't to say that Often was not engaged in strange research. There certainly is compelling evidence of this, but I seriously question its ties to MKULTRA and to Cameron. So the controversy isn't so much over the nature of Often's work, but more about the people involved in it, who they tested it on, who they tested it to be unleashed on. So John Marks says that often was under the direction of Dr. Stephen Aldrich, who ran the project out of the Office of Research and Development, ORD. Aldrich was a veteran of the Office of Scientific Information, OSI. Now these I can verify. He had been involved first in Artichoke during the 50s. This verified. Point in which it had formerly begun to investigate parapsychology, other fringe topics like lobotomies, radiation, ultrasonics, sterilizing. Now the research, Alex Constantine wrote this about Aldrich in his 1995 book, Psychic Dictatorship in the USA. At Langley, the experiments were presided over by Dr. Stephen Aldrich, a patron of the occult research, foreshadowing the use of mind control technology by satanic cults in the 80s and 90s, according to Julian McKinney, director of Electronic Surveillance Project of the Association of National Security Alumni. Dr. Aldrich, a graduate of Amherst and Northwestern, took control of the firm's Office of Research and Development, ORD, in 1962, upon the development or the departure of Sidney Gottlieb. He left Hegemony. The occasion marked the birth of Operation Often, which they said then was an investigation of the occult, with Houston sorceress Sybil Leek as their guide. CIA behavioralist studied the arcana of the occult underground. The CEI attributed, brought in a laboratory, or a social laboratory, to Often in 1972. The University of South California, in the form of a course in rituals of demonology and voodoo. So they were tested first. If seeing these things make you think in a certain way, and they absolutely do. So what is the SEI? The Scientific Engineering Institute in Boston. It's another CIA cover. It was established in 1956 to study radar. So Constantine again. Aldrich took control of the Office of Research and Development in 1962 from Gottlieb. CIA behavioralists carefully studied every aspect of the occult underground. In 1972, the Scientific Engineering Institute sponsored a course at the University of South Carolina in the rituals of demonology and voodoo. Aldrich focused on remote brain manipulation and the occult, a thread that runs through the SEI and many things that I've told you about what is actually working right now. Aldrich's interest in the occult, shared by scores of others in the intelligence world, may explain his panache for remote brain manipulation, based as it is on psychic technology. Under the direction of Aldrich, writes John Marks, in The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, ORD technocrats kept probing for ways to control human behavior. They were doing so with space-age technology that made the days of MKULTRA look like horse and buggery era. I mean buggy. So, what do we know? Dr. Albrecht was born in Illinois. He attended Deerfield Academy, Amherst College. He entered Northwest Medical School. He received a medical doctorate 47. Following his residency in internal medicine at St. Luke's Hospital, Chicago, and a year of Parmley Fellow, so teaching and research, at Northwestern University Medical School, he joined the Central Intelligence Agency. He served until 1979. While with the CIA, he established their Overseas Medical Support Program. He created and maintained the first national life sciences program in scientific intelligence. So know that this was going worldwide. Everyone was being tested. He subsequently applied for Deputy Director, Research and Development, Deputy Director, Medical Services, and Program Manager, National Government Industry Technological Intelligence Program. He served as a consultant to the President's Scientific Advisory Committee, the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Defense, and Justice. Peter Levanda writes in this Sinister Forces. Initially, Operation MKOFTEN was a joint CIA Army Chemical Corps drug project based on Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, using inmates, of course, of Holsburg State Prison in Philadelphia as test subjects. It came under the umbrella of the CIA's Office of Research and Development, which was concerned with parapsychology and the application of supernatural powers for military purposes. I'm sorry, guys, that's the words they used. I told you it was going to get weird. So Levenda notes that from these humble beginnings came the deluge. Later, often would become a kind of grab bag of CIA investigations into the paranormal and involve everything from seances and witchcraft to remote viewing, exotic drugs. And although the CIA had been investigating ESP and the paranormal and infiltrating occult groups since '52, when Adjirdrug Parich began the contact with the Nine, I can give you the spelling of that. He started channeling D9. So someone at the CIA evidently felt that the occult underground in 1969 might have access to special techniques for the manipulation of the consciousness, and memory, and took to their study with renewed vigor. 1966 not only was the kickoff of Project MKOFTEN, but also beginning of a major paradigm shift, not only in the conduct of psychological warfare, but the tone and the content of overall culture worldwide. A change. In fact, so much occultism would creep into the public consciousness in '66 that one author chose this as his year zero for the book Here's to My Sweet Satan, How the Occult Haunted Music, Movies, Pop Culture, 1966 to 1980. So those of us born in the 60s, this buds for you. This was for us to pass on to our children. And we've done a great job at that. In fact, so much occultism would creep into the public consciousness in 66. Look at the movies and the books that came out that year. Dark forces began to swirl, hover over psychic landscape, would carry out periodic bombing runs on the body public, leaving lasting collective traumas in their wake. How many of these books were orchestrated, how many arose in the poisoned atmosphere, is sometimes hard to determine. In the long run, probably immaterial, because once the genie's out of the bottle, it's going to do whatever it wants to do. Now, most of you are familiar with the events in question. They've been discussed time and time again in print, on podcasts, or in film, and other media. But if you start to look at them, not as a random series of coincidental events, or even as events manipulated by various generic intelligence agency, but as specific events orchestrated by a specific working group within a specific agency for a specific purpose, then on an entirely different character here, they start to seem like acts in a play, chapters in a book, or more accurately, the workings of a black magic spell. Concurrent with the birth of MKOFTEN, 1966 saw the establishment of the Church of Satan in San Francisco, created by Anton Sandor LaVey. Birth name Howard Stanton LaVey, by the way. LaVey claimed to have worked as a former police photographer, and according to Jacques Vallée, continued to work for the SFPD as a special agent, accredited. Now a trained musician and circus showman, LaVey understood the power of spectacle. I'm going to continue this Thursday, guys. I will be doing a show just on Trace Elements Radio, so please join us, and I'll continue. Thanks for listening, guys. Love you.